Welcome to my channel. If you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing. Nurse, a position that embodies compassion, dedication, and the unwavering commitment to care for others. It takes a special kind of person to devote their life to the well-being of others, to be there in times of need, and to provide comfort and healing. We place our trust in these caregivers, believing that they have our best interests at heart. But what happens when that trust is shattered? When the very individuals we rely on to protect us become the harbingers of our worst nightmares? Throughout history, there have been chilling cases of nurses who have betrayed their sacred oath, turning their healing hands into instruments of death. These killer nurses have left a trail of devastation, exploiting their positions of power to commit unspeakable acts. From administering lethal doses of medication to suffocating their victims, their methods are as varied as they are horrifying. In this video, we will explore the dark and twisted minds of these medical murderers. We will examine their backgrounds, their motives, and the chilling details of their crimes. Join me as I uncover the stories of those who turned the sanctity of the nursing profession into a macabre theater of death. Prepare yourself for a journey into the shadows where trust is betrayed and the line between caregiver and killer is blurred. This is the unsettling world of killer nurses. We will look into the lives of infamous figures who confessed to killing numerous patients and those suspected of taking the lives of many more. We will also examine the cases of nurses who used various methods to murder their victims. These are just a few examples of the many nurses who have turned their positions of trust into opportunities for murder. As we navigate through these harrowing stories, we will also consider the broader implications for the healthcare system. How can such individuals slip through the cracks? What measures can be put in place to prevent such tragedies from occurring in the future? This exploration is not just about recounting the horrors of the past, but also about understanding the vulnerabilities in our systems and the importance of vigilance and oversight. So, sit back and prepare yourself for a journey into the darkest corners of the nursing profession. This is a story of trust betrayed, of lives lost, and of the chilling reality that sometimes the very people we trust to save us can become our worst enemies. Welcome to the world of killer nurses. Mary Beth Tinning, born on September 11, 1942 in Duanesburg, New York, is an American former nursing assistant and convicted murderer. She was convicted of killing her 9th child, 4-month-old Tammy Lynn, in December 1985. Tinning is suspected of being involved in the deaths of her 8 other children, all of which occurred over a span of 14 years. Tinning's first child, Barbara, died in 1972 at the age of 8 days from acute meningitis. Her second and third children, Joseph Jr. and Jennifer, died within a few weeks of each other in 1972, with their deaths attributed to seizures and cardiac arrest, respectively. Over the next several years, Tinning's other children, Timothy, Nathan, Michael, Mary Frances, Jonathan, and Tammy Lynn, died under suspicious circumstances, with causes of death ranging from sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, to undetermined causes. In 1985, after the death of Tammy Lynn, authorities began to suspect foul play. A laboratory test indicated that Tammy Lynn had died from asphyxia by suffocation. Tinning was arrested on February 5, 1986, and charged with the murder of her 4-month-old daughter. The murder trial of Mary Beth Tinning opened in Schenectady County Court on June 22, 1987. The prosecution argued that the crucial statements made by Tinning on February 4, 1986, at State Police Headquarters were not coerced and would be admissible. Tinning's full 36-page confession would be available at trial. The medical testimony at the trial was complex, involving several doctors, all experts, who held different opinions on the disturbing tendencies of the Tinning children to die suddenly and without explanation. Dr. Thomas Oram testified that Tammy Lynn did not die from SIDS, but was smothered. The defense called several physicians to the stand to refute that allegation and to offer evidence that all the Tinning children suffered from a genetic defect. However, the prosecution called Dr. Marie Valdez de Pina, a nationally recognized expert on sudden infant death syndrome, to refute the defense claims. On July 17, 1987, Tinning was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. Tinning was denied parole 6 times before being granted parole at her 7th hearing in July 2018. She was released from prison on August 21, 2018. It is unclear if Tinning has ever been diagnosed with Munchausen syndrome by proxy, MSBP, a disorder where a caregiver fabricates or causes illness or injury in someone under their care for attention or sympathy. Some believe that her pattern of behavior aligns perfectly with the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition's DSM-5 Development and Course section on the disorder. Orville Lynn Majors, born on April 24, 1961, in Linton, Indiana, was a licensed practical nurse and serial killer who was convicted of murdering his patients at Vermilion County Hospital in Clinton, Indiana. Majors' killing spree took place between 1993 and 1995, during which he was believed to have caused the deaths of 100 to 130 patients, although he was only tried for 7 murders and convicted of 6. Majors' early life was marked by his experience caring for his elderly grandmother, which inspired him to pursue a career in nursing. He graduated from Nashville Memorial School of Practical Nursing in 1989 and began working at Vermilion County Hospital. He briefly took a higher-paying job in Tennessee but returned to VCH in 1993. Suspicion arose when the death rate at VCH significantly increased after Majors returned. The year before his return, an average of around 26 patients died annually at the 56-bed hospital and the 4-bed intensive care unit. After Majors started working at the facility, the rate skyrocketed to more than 100 per year, with nearly 1 out of every 3 patients admitted to the hospital dying. His coworkers began noticing a correlation between the spike in deaths and when he was on duty. In 1995, nursing supervisor Dawn Styrek discovered that Majors was on duty for 130 of the 147 deaths between 1993 and 1995. Alarmed, she alerted hospital officials, who called in the Indiana State Police. Majors was suspended pending investigation, and the Indiana State Nursing Board suspended his license for 5 years after determining he had exceeded his authority by giving emergency drugs and working in an ICU without a doctor. Majors was arrested in December 1997 and charged with multiple counts of murder. Following a high-profile trial, he was convicted of 6 murders in October 1999 and sentenced to 360 years in prison. Majors died in prison on September 24, 2017, at the age of 56. Vicki Dawn Jackson, born Vicki Dawn Carson, on February 13, 1966, is an American serial killer who was convicted of murdering at least 10 patients at the Nocona General Hospital in Nocona, Texas, between 2000 and 2001. The story began to unravel when an unusually high number of patient deaths occurred at the small rural hospital. Initially, these deaths were attributed to various medical conditions and considered unfortunate but unavoidable occurrences. However, as the number of deaths mounted, suspicions arose, prompting a closer examination of the circumstances. A thorough investigation was launched, focusing on the medical records and care provided to the deceased patients. Medical examiners conducted autopsies, searching for any signs of foul play or unusual medical complications. It was during these examinations that a pattern began to emerge. Many of the patients exhibited similar symptoms prior to their deaths, including sudden respiratory distress and muscle weakness. Investigators soon turned their attention to Vicki Dawn Jackson, a licensed vocational nurse employed at the hospital. Jackson, who had worked at Nocona General Hospital for several years, had been present during many of the suspicious deaths. Colleagues described her as a dedicated and competent nurse, but some also noted an unsettling demeanor, particularly in the aftermath of patient deaths. As the investigation deepened, investigators discovered that Jackson had access to mivacurium, a powerful muscle relaxant used during surgeries. Mivacurium, when administered improperly or in excessive doses, can paralyze the respiratory muscles, leading to suffocation. Medical records revealed that mivacurium had been administered to several of the deceased patients, raising serious concerns. Furthermore, witness testimony suggested that Jackson had acted suspiciously on several occasions. Some nurses reported observing Jackson lingering near patients shortly before their sudden deterioration. The mounting evidence against Jackson led to her arrest and subsequent indictment on multiple counts of murder. The trial that followed captivated the local community and garnered significant media attention. Prosecutors presented a compelling case, highlighting the suspicious pattern of deaths, the presence of mivacurium in the patient's systems, and the circumstantial evidence pointing towards Jackson's involvement. The defense, however, maintained Jackson's innocence. They argued that the deaths were due to natural causes or pre-existing medical conditions, and that the presence of mivacurium could be explained by legitimate medical reasons. They also questioned the reliability of witness testimony and the strength of the circumstantial evidence. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury found Jackson guilty on all counts. The evidence, though circumstantial, was deemed sufficient to establish her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Jackson was sentenced to life imprisonment, effectively ending her career as a nurse and confining her to a life behind bars. Richard Angelo, born on August 29, 1962, in Long Island, New York, is an American serial killer who operated within Long Island and West Islip, New York. He was convicted of murdering several of his patients and sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. Angelo was the only child of Joseph and Alice Angelo, both of whom worked in education. He graduated from St. John the Baptist Catholic High School in 1980 and later attended Farmingdale State College, where he excelled in his nursing program. Angelo began working as a registered nurse at Good Samaritan Hospital in Long Island in 1987. Angelo's crimes involved injecting patients with paralytic drugs such as Pavulon and Anactine, causing them to go into respiratory arrest. He would then attempt to revive them, hoping to be seen as a hero by his colleagues. His actions resulted in the deaths of at least 4 patients and the attempted murder of 1. Over 30 deceased patients were exhumed and examined for traces of these drugs. Angelo was arrested in October 1987 after a patient reported feeling unwell following an injection. He confessed to poisoning multiple patients during his time at the hospital. In 1989, he was convicted of second-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter, criminally negligent homicide, and assault. He was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. Richard Angelo is currently serving his sentence at the Great Meadow Correctional Facility in New York. He is eligible for parole in 2049 when he will be 87 years old. Efren Saldivar, born on September 30, 1969, in Brownsville, Texas, is an American serial killer who murdered patients while working as a respiratory therapist at Adventist Health Glendale, formerly Glendale Adventist Medical Center in Glendale, California. He used a paralytic drug, Pavulon, to cause respiratory and/or cardiac arrest in his victims. Saldivar's killing spree took place between 1988 and 1998. He was careful in selecting his victims, often choosing those who were unconscious and close to death, which made it difficult to detect a rise in the rate of patient deaths during his shifts. His employment was terminated on March 13, 1998, and he was arrested shortly afterward. During interrogation, Saldivar initially confessed to 50 murders, but later retracted his confession. Police exhumed the remains of patients who had died while Saldivar was on duty and found unusually high levels of Pavulon in 6 cadavers. Saldivar pleaded guilty to 6 counts of murder in 2002 and received 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He is currently incarcerated at California State Prison in Corcoran, California. Benjamin Geen, born in 1980, is a British former nurse who was convicted of killing 2 patients and causing grievous bodily harm to 15 others while working at Horton General Hospital in Banbury, Oxfordshire between 2003 and 2004. Geen's crimes were motivated by a thrill-seeking temperament, as he enjoyed the excitement of resuscitating patients after causing them to suffer respiratory arrest. Geen's colleagues at Horton General Hospital began to notice a pattern of patients experiencing unexpected respiratory failures during his shifts. These patients often had minor injuries such as dislocated shoulders, but would inexplicably suffer severe complications. In February 2004, Geen was apprehended after staff discovered a syringe filled with drugs on his person. He attempted to hide the evidence by discharging the syringe contents into his jacket pocket. During his trial in 2006, Geen was found guilty of 2 counts of murder and 15 counts of grievous bodily harm. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 30 years. Despite maintaining his innocence, Geen's multiple appeals have failed. In 2009, the Court of Appeal rejected claims that statistical evidence could show his conviction to be unsafe, stating that the evidence against him was overwhelming. In recent years, Geen's legal team has raised new evidence in an attempt to challenge his convictions. They argue that an analysis of data from patients in the U.S. with similar characteristics to those involved in Geen's case indicates that the number of respiratory arrests on Geen's ward was not unusual. However, the Criminal Cases Review Commission has rejected 3 applications for appeal, most recently in 2020. What is interesting, many believed in his innocence and started Justice for Ben Geen campaign as dedicated to overturning his conviction. The campaign argues that there were significant failings in the original trial, including unreliable statistical evidence and a misunderstanding of medical conditions. Supporters believe that Ben Geen was wrongfully convicted and have been working tirelessly to bring attention to his case. They have gathered expert reports from leading statisticians and doctors and have successfully obtained permission for a judicial review of the decision by the Criminal Cases Review Commission, CCRC, to refuse to refer the case to the Court of Appeal. In 2016, the campaign achieved a significant victory by obtaining permission for a judicial review. This brought new evidence and expert opinions to light, challenging the reliability of the original trial's evidence. Despite this progress, the case has not yet been referred back to the Court of Appeal for a retrial. The campaign continues to push for a fair retrial, and the outcome remains pending. Donald Harvey, born on April 15, 1952 in Hamilton, Ohio, was an American serial killer known as the Angel of Death. He claimed to have murdered 87 people, though 37 victims were confirmed. Harvey's killing spree took place between 1970 and 1987, while he worked as a hospital orderly in Ohio and Kentucky. Harvey's early life was marked by trauma. He was sexually molested by both an uncle and a neighbor from the ages of 5 to 18. He dropped out of school in the 9th grade but later earned a GED. After a brief stint in the United States Air Force, which ended due to 2 suicide attempts, Harvey began working in hospitals. Harvey's methods of killing were varied and included smothering patients with pillows, administering lethal doses of arsenic, cyanide, insulin, and morphine, turning off ventilators, and injecting patients with fluids tainted with hepatitis B and HIV. His victims ranged from middle-aged to elderly patients, primarily those in cardiac care. Harvey was arrested in 1987 after a patient at Drake Hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio, died from cyanide poisoning. A forensic pathologist detected the smell of bitter almonds, indicative of cyanide, during the autopsy, which led to an investigation and Harvey's subsequent arrest. During his trial, Harvey confessed to numerous murders, claiming that many were mercy killings to ease the suffering of terminally ill patients. However, prosecutors argued that he derived pleasure from the act of killing. Harvey was ultimately convicted of 36 murders and sentenced to 28 consecutive life sentences. Harvey died on March 30, 2017, after being beaten by a fellow inmate at the Toledo Correctional Institution in Ohio. Arnfinn Nesset was born on October 25, 1936, in Norway. He trained as a nurse and later became the director of the Orkdal Valley Nursing Home in 1977. His early career was marked by competence and dedication, but things took a dark turn when he began administering lethal doses of Curacet, a muscle-relaxing drug, to patients under his care. Nesset's killing spree began in May 1977 when he injected a 94-year-old man with Curacet. Over the next few years, an unusually high number of deaths occurred at the nursing home, but no one initially suspected foul play. It wasn't until November 1980 that large purchases of Curesit were discovered, leading to Nesset's arrest in March 1981. During questioning, Nesset initially claimed he bought the drug to kill wild dogs around the nursing home. However, he soon began confessing to multiple murders, eventually claiming responsibility for 27 deaths. Before the trial, he retracted these confessions, but was still found guilty of 22 murders in March 1983. He was sentenced to 21 years in prison, the maximum punishment allowed by Norwegian law at the time. Nesset was released in 2004 after serving his sentence, and is believed to be living under a new name in Norway. His case remains one of the most infamous in Scandinavian history, highlighting the need for stringent oversight in healthcare settings. Ayumi Kuboki, born on April 10, 1987, embarked on a path seemingly destined for compassion and healing. After obtaining her nursing license in 2008, she entered the healthcare field, initially finding fulfillment in her work. However, a darker side emerged during her tenure at the Oguchi Hospital in Yokohama, Japan, where she was employed from May 2015. Kuboki's actions shattered the public's trust in the medical profession and ignited a national conversation about patient safety and the psychological well-being of healthcare workers. In September 2016, Kuboki systematically murdered 3 elderly patients under her care. Her method was chilling in its simplicity and cruelty. She administered diametol, an antiseptic solution, into their intravenous drips, causing their slow and agonizing deaths. Her confession revealed a chilling motive: to avoid the trouble of explaining the patient's deaths to their relatives. This callous disregard for human life, this prioritizing of personal convenience over the lives of vulnerable individuals, sent shockwaves through Japanese society. The investigation into Kuboki's crimes, however, uncovered a far more disturbing reality. A significantly higher mortality rate among patients under her care raised suspicions of involvement in up to 48 deaths at the hospital between July and September 2016. This grim statistic painted a picture of a potential serial killer operating within the confines of a trusted medical institution. The case of Ayumi Kuboki serves as a stark reminder of the immense power and responsibility wielded by healthcare professionals. It exposed the potential vulnerabilities within the healthcare system, highlighting the urgent need for robust oversight mechanisms, vigilant colleagues, and a culture of transparency and accountability. Beyond the immediate tragedy, the case sparked a crucial debate about the psychological well-being of healthcare workers. The immense pressures and stresses inherent in the profession can take a significant toll on mental health. The case raised concerns about the availability of adequate support systems for healthcare workers, including access to mental health resources and stress management programs. Kuboki was sentenced to life imprisonment in 2018, a sentence that offers little solace to the families of her victims. Their grief, compounded by the betrayal of trust, serves as a poignant reminder of the enduring human cost of such heinous crimes. Jane Toppin, born Honora Kelly on March 31, 1854, in Boston, Massachusetts, was an American serial killer known as Jolly Jane. She is believed to have murdered over 100 people in Massachusetts between 1895 and 1901. Toppin confessed to 31 murders, claiming her ambition was to have killed more people, helpless people, than any other man or woman who ever lived. Toppin's early life was marked by tragedy. Her mother died of tuberculosis when she was very young, and her father, an eccentric and abusive alcoholic, surrendered her and her sister to the Boston Female Asylum, an orphanage for indigent female children. In 1862, she was placed as an indentured servant in the home of Mrs. Anne C. Toppin of Lowell, Massachusetts, where she took on the surname Toppin. In 1885, Toppin began training to be a nurse at Cambridge Hospital. She was well-liked and earned the nickname Jolly Jane. However, she used her patients as guinea pigs in experiments with morphine and atropine, altering their prescribed dosages to see the effects on their nervous systems. Toppin targeted elderly and very sick patients, often poisoning them to see how they would react and ultimately die. Toppin's killing spree continued, as she worked as a private nurse for families around Boston, killing older family members and stealing their belongings. She wasn't caught until she used a metallic-based poison on a victim, which finally sparked an investigation. In 1902, Toppin was found not guilty by reason of insanity and was committed for life to the Taunton Insane Hospital, where she died on August 17, 1938. Beverly Allett, also known as the Angel of Death, is an English serial killer who was convicted of murdering 4 infants, attempting to murder 3 others, and causing grievous bodily harm to 6 more at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital in Lincolnshire between February and April 1991. Born on October 4, 1968, in Grantham, Lincolnshire, Allett grew up in the village of Corby Glen. She had 2 sisters and a brother. Her father worked in an off-license, and her mother was a school cleaner. Allett attended Charles Reed Secondary Modern School and later took a nursing course at Grantham College. Allett's crimes were committed while she was working as a state-enrolled nurse on the children's ward at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital. She administered large doses of insulin to at least 2 of her victims and injected a large air bubble into another. The police initially struggled to establish how all the attacks were carried out. In May 1993, Allett was found guilty of 4 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, and 6 counts of causing grievous bodily harm. She received 13 life sentences and is currently detained at Rampton Secure Hospital in Nottinghamshire. Allett became eligible for parole after serving a minimum tariff of 30 years, which expired in November 2021. Niels Högl was born on December 30, 1976, in Wilhelmshaven, Lower Saxony, West Germany. He grew up in a seemingly normal family. His father was at the St. Willehad Hospital, his mother worked as a paralegal, and he had an older sister. Högl's childhood was described as sheltered, with no exposure to violence at home. After completing his vocational training in 1997 at the St. Willehad Hospital, Högl's career as a nurse began. He worked at the Oldenburg Clinic from 1999, stationed in its cardiac surgery intensive care unit, Ward 211. In August 2001, an unusual spike in resuscitations and deaths during his shifts raised concerns among doctors and medical staff. Högl's presence was noted in 58% of these incidents. After a 3-week sick leave, during which only 2 patients died, suspicions grew stronger. Under pressure from the head physician, Högl was transferred to the anesthesia ward in 2001. However, the suspicious incidents continued, and in September 2002 he was forced to resign. Despite his resignation, Högl's criminal activities persisted. He was later employed at Delmenhorst Hospital, where he continued his lethal actions. In 2005, Högl was arrested and initially charged with the murders of 6 patients. Over time, the number of victims linked to him increased dramatically. By 2019, he was convicted of 85 murders, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in peacetime Germany. Estimates suggest he may have claimed up to 300 victims over a span of 5 years. Högl's modus operandi involved administering lethal doses of medication, such as Imeline, which damaged the patient's circulatory systems. His crimes occurred at all times of the day, often shortly after patients were admitted, or even days later. The sheer number of victims and the methodical nature of his actions shocked investigators and the public alike. In 2019, Högl was sentenced to life imprisonment. The judge described him as a bookkeeper of death, emphasizing the cold and calculated nature of his crimes. The case prompted a re-evaluation of hospital safety protocols and led to investigations into potential negligence by hospital staff. Högl's background did not indicate any predisposition to such heinous acts. Described as quiet and unassuming, his transformation into a serial killer remains a subject of deep intrigue and horror. Lucy Letby was born on January 4, 1990, in Hereford, Herefordshire, England. She grew up in a seemingly normal environment with her parents, who were a finance manager and an accounts clerk. Lucy attended Aylstone School and then Hereford Sixth Form College. Her academic journey led her to the University of Chester, where she pursued and graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Nursing, BSN. Lucy Letby began her nursing career at the neonatal unit of the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2012. By 2015, she was qualified to work with infants in intensive care. Her colleagues and superiors regarded her as an average nurse, showing no signs of the horror she would soon unleash. Between June 2015 and June 2016, a series of unexpected infant deaths and near-fatal incidents occurred in the neonatal unit where Letby worked. The hospital staff initially struggled to understand the cause, attributing the anomalies to natural complications. However, concerns grew as the patterns became increasingly suspicious. Letby often seemed to be present during these tragic events. The hospital management faced criticism for ignoring early warnings about Letby. It wasn't until July 3, 2018, that Lucy Letby was arrested following a thorough investigation. The authorities had linked her to the suspicious deaths and injuries of several infants. In November 2020, Letby was charged with 7 counts of murder and 15 counts of attempted murder. Lucy Letby's trial began in 2023. During the proceedings, prosecutors presented compelling evidence against her. This included abnormal blood test results, skin discoloration, and inconsistencies in medical records. Additionally, handwritten notes, which were interpreted as confessions, painted a chilling picture of her actions. The prosecution argued that Letby had killed the infants by injecting them with air, poisoning them with insulin, and overfeeding them with milk. In August 2023, Lucy Letby was found guilty of 7 counts of murder and 6 counts of attempted murder. The judge sentenced her to life imprisonment with a whole life order, ensuring that she would never be released. This sentence was one of the harshest handed down in recent British history. Lindsay Clancy's, another nurse, case has captured national attention, raising complex questions about mental health, motherhood, and the criminal justice system. On January 24, 2023, Clancy, a Massachusetts nurse, allegedly killed her 3 young children, Cora, 5, Dawson, 3, and Callan, 8 months, in a tragic incident that has sparked widespread debate and concern. According to prosecutors, Clancy strangled her children with exercise bands while her husband was out running errands she had arranged. After the alleged murders, she attempted to take her own life by jumping from a 2nd-story window. This sequence of events has led to charges of murder against Clancy, who has pleaded not guilty. The defense argues that Clancy was suffering from severe postpartum depression and psychosis at the time of the incident. Her attorneys claim that she was over-medicated with a range of psychiatric drugs, which contributed to her mental instability. This defense highlights the often overlooked issue of postpartum mental health disorders, which can have devastating effects on new mothers and their families. Postpartum depression affects approximately 10 to 20% of new mothers, but postpartum psychosis is much rarer, occurring in about 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 deliveries. It is characterized by symptoms such as severe mood swings, hallucinations, and delusions. In Clancy's case, her defense team argues that these conditions impaired her ability to distinguish right from wrong at the time of the alleged crimes. The prosecution, however, contends that Clancy's actions were premeditated. They point to evidence suggesting she planned the day meticulously, including sending her husband on errands to ensure she had time alone with the children. This argument focuses on establishing intent and premeditation as key factors in the charges against her. The case has also brought attention to the role of medication in treating postpartum disorders. Clancy's defense claims that she was prescribed a cocktail of psychiatric drugs that may have exacerbated her condition rather than alleviating it. This raises important questions about how mental health conditions are diagnosed and treated in postpartum women, and whether current medical practices adequately address their needs. Public reaction to the case has been mixed. Some express sympathy for Clancy, viewing her as a victim of an inadequate mental health care system that failed to provide the necessary support and intervention. Others are more focused on the tragic loss of 3 young lives and question whether justice can be served if mental illness is used as a defense. The broader implications of this case extend beyond the courtroom. It highlights the need for greater awareness and understanding of postpartum mental health issues and underscores the importance of providing comprehensive support for new mothers. This includes better screening for postpartum disorders, more accessible mental health resources, and careful monitoring of medication regimens. As Lindsay Clancy's trial approaches in December 2025, it will likely continue to spark discussions about how society handles cases involving mental illness and criminal responsibility. The outcome could have significant implications for how similar cases are approached in the future. Elizabeth Tracy May Wetlaufer, born on June 10, 1967, in Zora Township, Ontario, she worked as a registered nurse and used her position to murder 8 senior citizens and attempt to kill 6 others between 2007 and 2016. Wetlaufer committed her crimes by injecting patients with lethal doses of insulin, a method that often went undetected due to the natural causes typically associated with elderly deaths. Wetlaufer began her killing spree shortly after starting work at the Crescent Care nursing home in Woodstock, Ontario. Her first murder occurred on August 11, 2007, when she injected James Silcox, an 84-year-old World War II veteran, with a fatal dose of insulin. Over the next 7 years, she killed 7 more residents at Crescent Care, including Maurice Granat, 84, Gladys Millard, 87, Helen Matheson, 95, Mary Zurowinski, 96, Helen Young, 90, and Maureen Pickering, 79. She also attempted to kill 2 other residents, but failed. Despite these alarming incidents, Wetlaufer's actions went unnoticed for years due to systemic failures in oversight and the difficulty of detecting insulin overdoses. In 2014, Wetlaufer was fired from Crescent Care for repeated medication errors, but continued working part-time at other facilities. Her final murder occurred in August 2014 when she killed Arpad Horvath, 75, at Meadow Park in London, Ontario. She later attempted to kill 2 more individuals, Sandra Towler, 77, at a retirement home in Paris, Ontario, and Beverly Bertram, 68, at a private residence in Ingersoll. Bertram survived and became the only living victim of Wetlaufer's attacks. Wetlaufer's crimes came to light in September 2016 when she checked herself into a drug rehabilitation program at the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, CMH, in Toronto. There, she confessed to staff that she had killed or harmed patients under her care. This led CAMH staff to notify authorities. Wetlaufer subsequently resigned as a nurse and provided police with a detailed confession. She admitted to feeling uncontrollable red surges before killing and described hearing laughter from the pit of hell afterward. She claimed that God or the devil had compelled her actions, but denied deriving pleasure from the killings. In October 2016, Wetlaufer was arrested and charged with 8 counts of murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of aggravated assault. She waived her right to a preliminary hearing and pleaded guilty to all charges in June 2017. On June 26th, she was sentenced to 8 concurrent life terms with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Wetlaufer's case shocked Canada and exposed significant gaps in healthcare oversight. Despite confessing her actions multiple times to friends, colleagues, and even a lawyer before entering rehab, no one reported her crimes to authorities. This failure prompted calls for systemic reforms in how healthcare facilities monitor staff behavior and handle patient deaths. Elizabeth Wetlaufer remains imprisoned as one of Canada's most prolific serial killers. Her actions serve as a grim reminder of how trust can be exploited within caregiving professions and underscore the importance of vigilance in protecting vulnerable populations. Kristen Gilbert, born on November 13, 1967, is an American serial killer and former nurse known for her chilling crimes at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northampton, Massachusetts. Working as a nurse from 1988 to 1996, she was convicted of murdering 4 patients and attempting to kill 2 others by administering lethal doses of epinephrine, a drug used to treat cardiac arrest. Gilbert's method involved injecting patients with epinephrine during their shifts, often when they were already in vulnerable positions. Her actions led to a series of unexplained cardiac arrests and deaths among patients, raising suspicions among her colleagues. The pattern of deaths coinciding with her presence during shifts prompted an investigation. In 1996, Gilbert was arrested after an extensive inquiry revealed evidence linking her to the deaths. Prosecutors argued that she had intentionally caused the medical emergencies to gain attention and admiration from her peers. During her trial in 2001, forensic experts presented evidence of her actions, including the timing of the drug administration and the subsequent deaths. Gilbert was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kimberly Sands gained notoriety for her heinous actions while working at a dialysis clinic in Lufkin, Texas. Born on November 3, 1973, Sands was a licensed practical nurse who, between 2007 and 2008, injected bleach into the intravenous lines of patients undergoing dialysis treatment. Her actions resulted in the deaths of 5 patients and severe injuries to several others. On April 28, 2008, during a routine day at the DaVita Dialysis Clinic, 2 patients experienced alarming drops in blood pressure. Witnesses reported seeing Sands prepare a bleach solution and inject it into the IV lines of patients Carolyn Reisinger and Marva Roan. Patient Lurleen Hamilton observed Sands filling syringes with bleach and expressed concern to clinic supervisors about Sands's behavior. Despite her attempts to downplay the situation, Sands was sent home for the day after the incidents were reported. Following an investigation, Sands was arrested and charged with capital murder and multiple counts of aggravated assault. During her trial in 2012, prosecutors presented evidence that included testimonies from fellow patients and staff who witnessed her actions. The jury found her guilty of killing 5 patients and injuring others, leading to a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Sands's defense argued that she was not solely responsible for the incidents, suggesting that systemic issues at the clinic contributed to the patient's complications. However, the evidence against her was compelling. The syringes used by Sands tested positive for bleach, and toxicology reports linked the bleach injections to patient deaths. Despite being spared the death penalty, Kimberly Sands's case raised significant concerns about patient safety and oversight within healthcare facilities. Her actions serve as a chilling reminder of how trust can be exploited in medical environments where caregivers are expected to protect and heal rather than harm. Charles Cullen is one of the most prolific serial killers in American history, responsible for murdering dozens, possibly hundreds of patients during his 16-year nursing career. Born on February 22, 1960, Cullen worked at multiple hospitals and nursing homes in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, where he exploited his access to medications to administer lethal overdoses. He confessed to killing at least 40 people, though investigators believe the true number could be closer to 400 due to incomplete records and unreported deaths. Cullen's crimes began in 1988 at St. Barnabas Medical Center in New Jersey, where he murdered patients using intravenous medication overdoses. Suspicious patterns of deaths emerged during his shifts, but instead of addressing the issue, hospital administrators quietly allowed him to resign. This pattern repeated at several other institutions, as hospitals prioritized avoiding lawsuits over investigating Cullen's actions. He moved from job to job, leaving a trail of unexplained deaths. Cullen's methods were calculated and chilling. He often used drugs like digoxin, insulin, and epinephrine to induce fatal heart conditions or hypoglycemia. His victims ranged from elderly patients to young adults, many of whom were not terminally ill. Despite his claims of being a mercy killer, investigators found no evidence that his victims were suffering or had requested euthanasia. Instead, his actions appeared driven by a combination of psychological instability and a compulsion to kill. Throughout his career, Cullen exhibited troubling behavior. He was accused of mishandling medications, harassing colleagues, and accessing patient records without authorization. He attempted suicide multiple times and spent time in psychiatric facilities, but was repeatedly rehired by hospitals that failed to share information about his past misconduct. Cullen's downfall began in 2003 while working at Somerset Medical Center in New Jersey. A series of suspicious patient deaths led nurse Amy Loughran, a colleague and friend of Cullen's, to review his medication withdrawal records. She discovered alarming patterns that linked him to overdoses. Loughran worked with police by wearing a wire during conversations with Cullen, gathering crucial evidence that led to his arrest. On December 12, 2003, Cullen was apprehended and later confessed to killing patients across 9 hospitals and 1 nursing home. In 2006, he pleaded guilty to 29 murders and several attempted murders, but admitted he had lost track of the total number of victims. He is serving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Cullen's case exposed systemic failures within the healthcare system. Hospitals repeatedly failed to report suspicions about him or investigate patient deaths thoroughly, allowing him to continue killing for years. His actions led to reforms in hospital hiring practices and greater scrutiny of healthcare workers' employment histories. Another killer nurse, Amelia Dyer, earned infamy as one of the most prolific murderers in British history. Operating during the Victorian era, Dyer exploited the widespread practice of baby farming, where desperate unmarried mothers paid to have their infants cared for or adopted. Born in 1837 in Bristol, she trained as a nurse but turned to baby farming in the 1860s, lured by its financial opportunities. Initially, she allowed infants to die slowly from neglect or starvation, often using opium-laced syrup to keep them quiet. Over time, she adopted quicker methods, strangling babies with white tape to maximize profit. Dyer advertised herself as a loving caretaker, assuring mothers their children would be safe. However, most infants were killed within days of arriving in her care. She frequently moved and used aliases to avoid detection. Authorities began investigating her after the body of a baby was found in the River Thames in 1896. The infant had white tape around its neck, a detail Dyer later admitted was her signature. A police raid on her home uncovered evidence of her crimes, including adoption letters and baby clothes, though no bodies were found at the scene. Over her decades-long career, Dyer is believed to have murdered between 200 and 400 babies. Despite this staggering number, she was convicted for only 1 murder, the death of baby Helena Fry, and sentenced to death. On June 10, 1896, Amelia Dyer was hanged at Newgate Prison. Her case highlighted the vulnerabilities of Victorian society, where high infant mortality rates and stigma against single mothers allowed such crimes to go unnoticed for years. It also led to greater scrutiny of adoption practices and reforms aimed at protecting children from exploitation and harm. Lucia de Burke, a Dutch pediatric nurse, became the center of one of the most infamous miscarriages of justice in the Netherlands. Born in 1961, she worked at several hospitals in The Hague between 1997 and 2001. Her life changed dramatically in December 2001 when she was arrested and charged with 13 murders and 5 attempted murders of patients under her care. The alleged victims included infants, toddlers, and elderly patients. Prosecutors claimed she had administered lethal doses of drugs such as potassium, morphine, and chloral hydrate. The case against de Burke relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and statistical analysis. Investigators noted that she was present during an unusually high number of deaths or medical emergencies in her shifts compared to others. A particularly damning piece of evidence came from the death of a 5-month-old infant at Juliana Children's Hospital. Autopsy results reportedly showed abnormally high levels of digoxin, a heart medication, in the infant's body. Prosecutors argued that de Burke had access to the drug and had deliberately administered it to cause death. Additional evidence included diary entries where de Burke wrote about a very great secret and feelings of compulsion, which prosecutors interpreted as admissions of guilt. Her personal life was also scrutinized, with allegations that she had falsified her nursing credentials and stolen books on serial killers from a hospital library. Despite no direct witnesses or conclusive forensic proof linking her to the deaths, the court convicted her in 2003 of 4 murders and 3 attempted murders, sentencing her to life imprisonment. De Burke appealed the conviction, but in 2004, the appeals court not only upheld her sentence, but added 3 more murder convictions. Statistical evidence played a critical role in these trials. Experts argued that the probability of so many deaths occurring naturally during her shifts was astronomically low, 1 in 342 million. However, critics later pointed out that these calculations were flawed and based on biased assumptions. The case began to unravel after sustained campaigns by scientists, statisticians, and journalists who questioned the validity of the evidence. Philosopher Ton Dirksen and geriatrician Mette No Dirksen published a detailed analysis highlighting errors in the statistical arguments and medical interpretations. They demonstrated that many deaths attributed to Burke were either natural or caused by unrelated factors such as hospital mismanagement or diagnostic errors. In 2008, new evidence emerged undermining key aspects of her conviction. For example, it was revealed that digoxin levels naturally increase after death due to decomposition processes, invalidating claims of poisoning in one case. Administrative errors also showed that Burke had not been present during some incidents for which she was blamed. These revelations prompted the Dutch Supreme Court to reopen the case. Burke was released from prison in 2008 pending a retrial. In April 2010, she was fully exonerated after spending over 6 years in prison. The court acknowledged that there was no credible evidence linking her to any murders or attempted murders and declared her innocent. The case is now regarded as one of the most significant miscarriages of justice in Dutch history. It exposed systemic flaws in how statistical evidence is used in criminal cases and highlighted the dangers of confirmation bias during investigations. Burke received an official apology from the Dutch government, along with financial compensation for her wrongful imprisonment. Her story remains a cautionary tale about the misuse of statistics and circumstantial evidence in legal proceedings. It also sparked widespread discussions about improving safeguards against wrongful convictions, particularly in cases involving healthcare professionals accused of harming patients. Jeanine Ann Jones, born on July 13, 1950, is an American serial killer and former pediatric nurse responsible for the deaths of up to 60 infants and children under her care during the late 1970s and early 1980s. Her crimes were committed while she worked at the Bexar County Hospital in San Antonio, Texas, and later at a private pediatric clinic in Kerrville. Jones used her position as a nurse to administer lethal doses of drugs, including digoxin, heparin, and succinylcholine, to induce medical crises in her patients. These actions often resulted in death or severe injury. While working at the Bexar County Hospital's Pediatric Intensive Care Unit, ICU, Jones was linked to an unusually high number of medical emergencies and deaths. A study later revealed that children under her care were significantly more likely to suffer unexpected crises or die compared to other shifts. Despite these alarming patterns, the hospital avoided a formal investigation, fearing lawsuits and reputational damage. Instead, Jones and other licensed vocational nurses, LVNs, were asked to resign under the pretext of upgrading the ICU staff to registered nurses, RNs. Jones left with a glowing letter of recommendation, which allowed her to secure a new job at a private pediatric clinic. At the Kerrville Clinic, Jones's actions continued. Over just 1 month in 1982, 6 children experienced sudden respiratory arrests after routine treatments administered by her. Among them was 15-month-old Chelsea McClellan, who died after being injected with succinylcholine. This powerful muscle relaxant paralyzed her breathing muscles, leading to her death. An investigation into Chelsea's death confirmed the presence of succinylcholine in her body, which became key evidence against Jones. In 1984, Jones was convicted of Chelsea McClellan's murder and sentenced to 99 years in prison. She was also convicted of injuring another child and received a concurrent 60-year sentence. However, due to a Texas law aimed at reducing prison overcrowding, she became eligible for mandatory release after serving only a third of her sentence. This prompted prosecutors to reopen investigations into other suspicious deaths linked to Jones. In 2017, new evidence led to 5 additional murder charges against Jones, preventing her release. She was accused of killing infants, Joshua Sawyer, 11 months, Paul Villarreal, 3 months, Rosemary Vega, 2 years, Ricky Nelson, 8 months, and Patrick Zavala, 4.5 months. These charges were based on patterns of unexplained deaths during her shifts and toxicology findings from exhumed bodies. In January 2020, Jones pleaded guilty to the murder of Joshua Sawyer as part of a plea deal that dropped 4 other charges. She was sentenced to life in prison and will not be eligible for parole until she is approximately 87 years old. Prosecutors described her actions as evil, noting that she exploited her trusted role as a nurse to decide who lived and who died. Jones's motives remain unclear, but are believed to include attention-seeking behavior and a desire to create medical emergencies where she could appear as a savior. Some theorized she wanted to demonstrate the need for a pediatric ICU at Bexar County Hospital by causing crises among patients. Her case exposed systemic failures in healthcare oversight and highlighted how institutional negligence allowed her crimes to continue unchecked for years. The exact number of Jones's victims remains unknown due to destroyed hospital records from her time at Bexar County Hospital. Her actions have left an indelible mark on medical history as one of the most notorious cases of healthcare serial killing in the United States. Deirdre Morley, a pediatric nurse from Newcastle, County Dublin, was found not guilty by reason of insanity for the murders of her 3 children, Connor, 9, Derek, 7, and Carla McGinley, 3, in January 2020. The court heard that Morley suffered from a severe psychotic depressive illness, which led her to believe she had irreparably damaged her children and that they were doomed. Her mental health had deteriorated significantly, with delusions and psychosis influencing her actions. In the days leading up to the tragedy, Morley experienced overwhelming feelings of inadequacy as a mother and developed a plan to end her life and those of her children, believing it was the only way to save them from future suffering. On January 24, 2020, she smothered her children and attempted suicide. Her husband, Andrew McGinley, was away on a work trip at the time and returned to find the aftermath. During the trial, extensive psychiatric evidence was presented, showing that Morley had a history of mental health struggles dating back to the late 1990s. She had sought help intermittently, but concealed the severity of her condition from those around her. Psychiatrists testified that she met the criteria for not guilty by reason of insanity due to her inability to understand the wrongfulness of her actions at the time. Morley's case highlighted systemic issues in mental health care and led to calls for an investigation into how her condition was managed. After the trial, she was committed to the Central Mental Hospital for treatment. The case remains a poignant reminder of the complexities of mental illness and its potential consequences when left untreated or inadequately addressed. These monsters chose the position of nurse not out of compassion, not out of a desire to heal, but because it gave them unparalleled access to the most vulnerable. The role of a nurse is one of trust, care, and authority, a position where lives are placed in their hands without question. It is this trust that they exploited, using it as a shield to hide their dark intentions. Hospitals and care homes became their perfect hunting grounds, places where death is not unexpected and where the line between natural causes and foul play can so easily blur. What makes their crimes even more chilling is the uncertainty that surrounds them. We will never truly know how many lives they took or how long they operated before being caught. The official numbers tied to their names are likely just a fraction of the real toll. These were individuals who thrived in environments designed to protect life, manipulating systems that were meant to safeguard the most vulnerable. They used their access to drugs and medical knowledge not to save lives, but to end them, often with methods so subtle that suspicion rarely arose until it was far too late. Their actions force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. We cannot afford to blindly trust someone simply because of their position. The uniform they wore and the title they held allowed them to move through their crimes undetected for years, even decades in some cases. They relied on the assumption that nurses are inherently good, that those in healthcare are above suspicion. This blind faith allowed them to continue their horrific acts without question. These cases serve as a grim reminder that evil can hide behind even the most trusted roles in society. While most nurses dedicate their lives to healing and helping others, these individuals turned that sacred duty into something sinister. It's a sobering thought that forces us to question how such atrocities could go unnoticed for so long, and how systems designed to protect patients could fail so catastrophically. The full extent of their crimes may never be known. How many lives were lost? How many families were left grieving without answers? How many deaths were written off as natural causes when they were anything but? These are questions that will likely remain unanswered, leaving behind a haunting legacy of uncertainty. In Part 2, we will explore more monsters who walked the halls of hospitals, wearing the mask of a caregiver while harboring the heart of a predator. Their stories will continue to shock, disturb, and remind us that evil can exist in the most unexpected places. Let me know in the comments if you want Part 2. Bye.